So I worked with Stephen, so I got to get him to come and talk to us. But from the first time I met Stephen, I found him to be one of the most kind, intelligent, and intentional product designers. And really, it's a super joy to work with him. I can think of no better person to come talk to us about trust, influence, and how to build great products than him. So I'm really excited to get Stephen on the screen and kind of share his story and talk a little bit about how to design great products. So if you could all help me join, kind of welcome Stephen to the stage by a clap. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, everybody. I'm just gonna try and pin the other chat. That won't work. All good. Thanks for having me. I wish I was down in Orlando. Um, so I'm gonna share my screen, share my content. I'm gonna send a request, Abhishek. You might need to let me. I super appreciate Abhishek and Jason for inviting me. I think I was supposed to, like, we talked about it months ago previously, but then I had a baby, so things kind of stopped. Oh, there we go. Okay. Awesome. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. Everything good? Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so Abhishek kind of mentioned what the title was. I want to talk about more than just wireframes, like what really goes into designing products, especially when you're working with tons of different people, and how to build trust, gain influence through everything that designers usually use, like empathy and like building relationships and such. Um, so I'll talk about some of my foundational experiences, then some 0 to 1 product work I did recently at my current company. Um, I'll give you some tools to use to help with like build empathy and relationship building within teams, and then hopefully give you some takeaways, and then some time for a Q&A. So a little bit about me. Right now, I'm a lead product designer in GovTech from the Hudson Valley, New York. So I'm on the East Coast as well. It's also pitch black outside right now, which is making me incredibly sad. I'm a new dad. It's kind of crazy that when I started working on this slide deck half a month ago or a few weeks ago, my son was 8 months old, and now he's about to be 9 months old and probably walking soon. Uh, I feel like every designer would probably do this, but my current obsession's definitely been parenting apps, like applications. Uh, Most of them are awful. We use them for like tracking sleep or inputting food, like starting solids, and some of them cost a ton of money. Um, and most of them are awful. Like they're just really, really bad apps, like with usability problems that like all of us in the room, all y'all like are ripe for for fixing, hopefully. And I can't looking at this photo now, I can't imagine like how not sleep deprived I look because this was maybe the first time I left the apartment that me and my wife are in after having a baby. He was maybe 2 months old and I hadn't slept like at all because that's what babies do. But anyway, so I want to talk a bit about some of the experiences that made me before I got into like what some would call real product design or hey, this is my title, I'm a product designer, or associate product designer, etc. So some of those foundational experiences. So I had a long path to get to product design. It started with art school. I waited on tables and bartended for a long time, moved to New York, worked as a graphic designer, was designing like sports design for like horse shows or triathlons, and I also worked on restaurant design, like menus and weddings and tons of stuff. And then I eventually got into tech, and I was working for in educational tech. But I started in production or like pre-production. So I was doing a lot of like physical media still, but also digital media. So like kind of the intersection and working with a lot of tech. Like I was sitting in the room with devs, I was sitting with PMs. And it was there that I started getting my first opportunity to like do product design, but not have the title. Uh, I had like I figured out how to essentially help sell financial aid to students, like what was the best way to communicate it, and interest with the in the intersection of like digital media, our software, and physical media. And it was then that I'm like, okay, I knew for sure I wanted to just get into full product design. So COVID happened, and like a lot of people, I'm like, I want to change my life. So I took some UX classes, and I pretty quickly got a job. And that was my first GovTech role. I worked at a startup called Mark 43. I was working on 911 software. And then after about a year there, I transitioned over to NeoGov, where I am today, which is another GovTech company. Avishek maybe has spoken about it, but we work on mostly human resource type products. Um, Very complex, but super interesting space. But it was a very long journey, and I feel like the way I kind of mapped this out, if I was to redo it or spend a little more time, which I generally don't have lately because of a baby, I might have put like restaurant as just a single line above that kind of trailed half of my work experience because I kind of never stopped doing that, and it was always something that like supported my life. So some of those foundational experiences, I really want to start with like I worked thousands of hours in restaurants from a young age. I was 14 when my dad encouraged me to start working and getting a job in a restaurant. And I was seating tables, taking takeout orders. I was not doing a good job at it when I was like 14. I still remember the mistakes I made at 14, like messing up a takeout order and needing to like walk a takeout order to like the local mattress company that was down the street. My dad really hoped, though, that this would help me come out of my shell. I was incredibly shy at 14. Um, and then over the years, I did nearly every role, though, in restaurants, uh, from seating tables to bartending, helping manage restaurants, working a bit in the back of the house. Um, I helped thousands of people, made really good money. Oh, technical issues. Uh, and I actually, it was funny. I had to take a pay cut when I got my first design job, which was both painful but like super exciting. I'm like, oh, I wanted to do graphic design at the time. It was a while ago, and okay, I have to stop bartending. All right, I'm gonna go do just graphic design. But I remember when I was working in restaurants, I didn't feel like those experiences were really going to help me. Like I felt stuck. Honestly, it was really difficult. There were a lot of moments in my life, like while waiting on tables and while it was slow, just going like, what am I doing? Like, where am I going to go next? Like, how am I going to have a family or anything? Um, but looking back, those experiences have paid like dividends in skills I use every day. So some of those skills I want to talk about are like humility, for instance, putting others first, listening, staying grounded. When you're waiting on tables, you really, as you do it long enough, you're like learning how to manage yours, but also help other people. I think the best restaurants run the best when all the servers are kind of helping each other. And it was like really like later restaurant jobs where I was working in fine dining, where like we all pooled tips and we essentially ran and waited on an entire restaurant together. Um, and that kind of experience really taught me to kind of stay grounded and not just think of myself. Um, Drive under pressure, like staying moving, staying focused, delivering results. I remember the restaurant I worked the most at was probably this place on the water in Maine, and um, it it got crazy during the summer just because it was a vacation area. I know you're in Orlando, so similar vibe in southern Maine, where there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming. And if it rained, you would suddenly, I'd be waiting on like a full room with 5 to 7 tables, all with like 8 to 10 people each. And it was just nuts. And it took a long time for me to like grow enough to, when that happened, not freak out and really get anxious. So learning really how to stay focused. And some of those nights were just like utter chaos, regardless of how much I learned. Uh, but there was no like pause button. So I had to learn how to like kind of just keep going. And relationship building, like earning trust, working effectively with anyone, not just the people, in this case, not just the people I was like serving, but also my coworkers. You meet so like in restaurant industry, you meet so many different types of people. It was a wild time, and it just taught me how to build rapport later on across every team I've ever worked on. And then I think this one goes with maybe without saying, but observation and adaptability, being able to read a room, like really quickly noticing subtle cues. Um, like, is a guest frowning? Did they say something slightly different that like tr kind of keys me into knowing that something's wrong? Is a teammate stressed? And knowing how to adjust after, knowing like learning through like repetition of like how to react in those situations. And all of that kind of translates later on in my design career to like reading stakeholders, you know, talking to users while you're researching. These restaurants started in a restaurant, but they've definitely helped me succeed today. I also went to art school, as I mentioned earlier. Um, I think this is really where I honed my craft and quickly learned, very quickly, as a freshman, that like talent alone wasn't enough. I had to question my own work. I had to be willing to discuss it with others. I had to accept like I was not perfect, and there was always something to improve. And I learned the value of putting in the hours, like whether it was drawing, painting, graphic design projects. In this case, in the picture, I was painting a 8 foot by like 32-inch painting. This was my focus my senior year of college. Because when I started art school, it was like I want to be an illustrator. I want to work on like video games and things like that. I was an 18-year-old who really didn't know what he wanted to do, and I fell in love with painting. I'd always been into drawing and kind of got enraptured by it. And slowly through college, also started working a lot more with digital tools. Um, but these like habits that I was building, they weren't just about making art. They taught me how to approach problems thoughtfully, how to collaborate, again, staying humble, and like developing craft through like a consistent effort. Um, so some of those lessons I learned were like critical thinking, like questioning assumptions, analyzing before acting. On that last slide, actually, I'll go back. I remember I had started painting this, and I don't know how big the screen is, but there was a figure in the middle of the painting, and the dean of painting walked into the room, and he was like, I wish the figure was like a foot or two to the right. And I like stepped back and I'm like, ah, you're right. Oh no. And I remember like kind of going back to the drawing board and like knowing I needed to redo it. But like analyzing before acting, I think is like incredibly important. Like, in design, does the solution actually solve the problem? Or, in the case of painting, like, should I have drawn it out more and like discussed it with other people a little more? Collaborative feedback, learning how to discuss work openly in art school was like, I don't know, carried through my entire life. Uh, if I like joining teams and seeing like that they don't really have like a feedback culture, or like talking to teams that don't like uh, it's such a place for growth for I think a lot of designers and just anyone in general. Um, And in art school, like these critique sessions were pretty intense. Um, I think we called them critiques. I don't think we called them even feedback sessions. I prefer calling them feedback sessions now because I like the like kind of having it be about like asking questions and engaging with folks and um, making people feel safe while doing it. Humility and craft, like knowing there's always room to improve, as I mentioned earlier. No matter how confident you feel, like there's always something to refine. Um, I spent, as this next thing says, discipline and practice, like skill comes with time. Like I spent hours and hours in my small dorm room painting, like uh trying to build skill. And there were folks that like could do it way quicker than me. I mean, I look back at some of my work and I'm like, oh, it's great, but like I remember being a kid and struggling. And this skill, like coming with time, like I think still applies to design. There's definitely days where I'm like, what am I doing? But putting in the time, like I think rewards that effort. So designing a 0 to 1 product in GovTech. So I want to like jump forward like, a lot of years. Um, it took me a while to earn that first role. Like I was bartending for a while. I moved to New York. Um, I did graphic design on the side. And then eventually, once I started like being a product designer, um, most of the early things I was working on it with like big teams. There are products already built, so I didn't really get an opportunity that quickly to build something from scratch in the enterprise world at least. Um, so eventually, I think this was a few years at this point, like 2 years ago, was one of the first instances where I got to really start working on something that was 0 to 1. So like starting from nothing essentially to finding problems, figuring out like how exactly to ship it. And I think this was the beginning of me really figuring out how to lead without a formal title, or at least defining how I wanted to work through it. So I'll talk a bit about like what the project was. Our challenge at NeoGov in this case, we were trying to figure out how to help managers who sometimes can miss problems with their employees until it's too late. Problems like burnout or safety issues they might be experiencing. And then figuring out like how can we use software to help. Um, so when I join new teams, I'm never like starting on a new project and just jumping straight into the ideas. I always think like where can design help the most? Um, Before I open Figma or any tool like that, generally I start writing down everything I know. What does success look like? What questions do I have? In this case, even working on this project felt kind of almost a bit of luck. Like my manager at the time had to leave for a bit, was like, "Hey, can you take this on?" He introduced me to like some of the product manager, etc., the coworkers I'd be working with. And when he came back, he's like, "Do you want to keep working?" And I'm like, "Yes, I love the people I'm working with. I want to keep working on this. It's interesting." So he kind of showed me some of the stuff that was already started. I remember introducing myself to the product manager, meeting one of the devs, like getting thrown into some meetings with executives, and just kind of being at that point just like a fly on the wall. And on this slide, I have what is essentially feature documentation. So again, I and most of my team currently at NeoGov, we start with like documenting things, and I think actually not just NeoGov, but a lot of newer design teams that I've heard from leads at least start with documentation before they even like get into Figma. It's very tempting to just like jump into Figma. But like drafting what the problem statement is, what's the scope, what are some, maybe there's solution details already drafted. Maybe the team's already worked through some stuff. I think in my case they had. So I kind of draft all that out, have some of my ideas and I'm checking with the team that I'm working with. Am I missing any key points? Do I understand the persona correctly or the business problem correctly? Am I tracking all these issues? And this step might sound boring, and I remember when I was taking a leadership class like a couple years ago, I was like, but what am I drafting with documentation? It still felt a little like unclear. So it definitely takes a few times of doing this process to really figure out like what supports your process afterwards and like kind of what works for you. And I wrote like clarify before designing, like defining the problem. I mean, a lot of us think about that, like when we're doing design challenges and such, but I think also like clarifying like who you're working with can really help in this case. Really getting to know like who the engineers are and like what they're struggling with, or like who the product manager is, what they're struggling with. Who are the stakeholders? Like what do they want out of the project? Um, and once I've set that foundation, like I focus a lot on bringing everyone along for the ride. So mapping out my entire design process, I use Jira and Confluence, but there's tons of tools you can use. One me actually during this, I think at first I used like Todoist, and then we used like some Kanban board, me and the PM, where we had like we tracked everything we worked on. But I've since shifted to like tracking all my design uh, projects with Jira. Um, but from feature workshops to empathy mapping to ideating workflows, like I'm documenting all of it and the process and what I've developed and like how the meetings went with these folks. This helps bring like PMs, engineers, and leadership into this process early and throughout the process. And I think by like communicating this process and what you're working on, like totally, not just the Figma docs, um, can like open up collaboration more. So and just make like kind of helps teamwork shine. Um, During this project, I also had the chance to fly out to LA where the office is, and I remember I spent most of that trip kind of in uh, like a separate boardroom with like the executives and the product manager I was working with, devs, general manager, and we'd take breaks during the meetings. They generally lasted like all day or like half the day. And I remember one time me and the product manager took a break and we're on the patio. I had my laptop with some Figma going, and we're just kind of solutioning some things and ideating together. And like that, our relationship was strong enough that like we were able to kind of bounce things off each other really quickly and work from what we had been dealing with in these meetings and like kind of develop and design like a flow that we had been working on but couldn't really crack it. And it became like one of the cornerstones of the product. Um, and you don't need to be on like the same patio to do that. Like I've worked remotely for years now and then helped build other successful products. But you do need to communicate like constantly. And I remember like this is generally what I always tell like very junior designers. But I think it's important for everyone to know. Just like not building in a silo, and that includes like it I feel like it's common sense to tell your design team like you're working on or your design coworkers, but I think it's easy to forget like, the other folks on in these other groups. Um, so just what we built in brief, I can't really show you exactly, but we build a tool that helps public safety orgs like get visibility into real risk patterns, like amongst their teams. This space was full of very manual, disconnected processes before. Um, when we started building it, it wasn't perfect. There were a lot of meetings that went round and round. but we learned and kept improving and adjusting and helping each other move forward. And by clarifying first, learning together, brainstorming, working through workshops, we built something that sells. And we also built trust in each other. Like this is uh, one of my embedded product teams that I work very closely with, and I felt like we really developed a strong trust in each other. And that didn't come from pixels. It came from like empathy and relationships, which I'll talk a little bit next. Um, Water. I'm a little jealous that you're all in a brewery right now. Um, so I'll talk a bit about building empathy and relationships. Um, when people ask me what's helped me the most as a designer, it's not the tools or the frameworks. It's, I think, the relationships I've built along the way. And not just as a designer, but just working in general. Design is collaborative, and I think empathy is the foundation that really makes real collaboration possible. And I think, I mean, don't you want to love who you work with? Like, so building stronger relationships, like I think it's a win-win. So I have a few like key frameworks that I think are incredibly important. Um, and I want to start with like serving the team first. So as I mentioned earlier, like whenever I join a new team, I generally don't rush into suggesting changes. I'm a little bit cautious about how I present things. I want to start by getting to know who I'm working with. What have they been working on? Where have they succeeded? What have they been struggling with? What do they want to achieve? And the first goal is to serve the team, not necessarily overhaul it. And I think with design, that's incredibly important. A lot of designers, even me, we have big ideas. We want to change the world. Like, you wouldn't be going to a design meetup if you weren't like kind of obsessed with design. Like, I spent a lot of time like involved in the design world online, whether it was design Twitter or kind of engaging with folks through LinkedIn, etc. Like, we want to build interesting products, but I think the way to get there sometimes is it's like a little bit like slow at almost like slow is fast. Like once you can like do this little bit of serving the team, the service mindset, like you'll build that trust. So one of the tools I like to use is creating space for insights. So on the left here, I have a research document, pretty normal, showing like what I would use as an intro or a rundown, what some qualitative research questions might be, what questions around features I might be doing. Recently, I've been like building out also UX heuristic based research where I like take customer sentiment and I link it to UX heuristics and then I like look for those specific customers to speak with. But what I'm also trying to do is keeping this research open. So my team members can like kind of see it as I'm kind of working through it. I don't want things to be a surprise when I'm working on it. Like the fact that I'm like working on research shouldn't be shocking. I'm a designer. It's for the team. Um, and after I've kind of like done this research and while I'm doing it, on the right, I have like discovery results. I think it's important to show what your key findings are, what your sentiment is from the customers that you spoke with, or whoever. Maybe it's stakeholders. Maybe it's internal. Maybe it's not even external. It could be internal if you're working on internal tools or a bunch of other things. Um, I like to write what my takeaways are. What do I think about this sentiment and these findings? And then I think this is really incredibly important, the what we can do. So as design, I think it's our duty, it's our job to like give suggestions on how to move forward. we shouldn't just be like delivering results, but not also saying like, hey, we could do X, Y, or Z to improve this. I mean, it's kind of like how a boss never wants to be given a problem. They want to, if you're going to come to them with a problem, you should come to them with how to fix it too. What I love about doing this though, and sharing this kind of thing, especially with like engineers or not even engineers, like I work very closely with certain subject matter experts that are essentially general managers or product owners. Um, these folks like start noticing other pain points, or they start like thinking with a little bit more of a user mindset or a persona mindset. Um, and like I've had engineers like notice pain points and then that's shifted how they want to build something. Or like recently I was showing like a few options and the engineer is like, I think we could like do this and I think it'd be really worth it. And it was like the harder thing. And it's sometimes surprising when an engineer is like, yeah, I want to do the thing that's more difficult because they really feel strongly about how it can affect the product. I don't think, as far as I've been able to tell, like without sharing this kind of work, like you're not kind of building that like relationship with your teammates. This just makes that whole relationship team momentum stronger. Um, it also like letting like people hear your team hear like users firsthand, like it just creates stronger solutions and then like real buy-in. Some of my team have been like using recordings from customer interviews and like playing them during research readouts, which I think have just been like, I love it. It really changes like the tone of the research. Like it makes it feel so incredibly real. So I'm a strong believer in creating psychological safety. Um, and I mean, this goes for everywhere, work for sure. Uh, During project planning, though, like I'll often ask with my team, and this is like with the engineers or like a general manager, a product manager, I'll ask, what's the worst thing that could happen if this launched tomorrow? This line sounds simple, but when you're dealing with products that could be making a lot of money or are making a lot of money, and it's people's salaries on the line or livelihoods or we don't want to cause churn or something. Um, you can this sentence can help people feel like, especially with all the previous work, people can feel slightly more comfortable voicing those fears. Especially, I think the last time I did this, I had everyone write it down and then just like all paste it at the same time. And when those kind of fears and those concerns are like out in the open, you can like actually start planning for them, which kind of helps the team feel safer in general, especially as you're moving forward on projects that might have been a little cloudy earlier. You might have had instances of like, oh, there are some unknown unknowns that we don't like understand yet. Okay, we need to research this. Next, collaborative in action. Like I talked a bit about this, like running workshops, stuff like that. Like I think they're incredibly fruitful. Um, Recently I've been generally like during project planning, like running empathy workshops to understand different personas with the entire like embedded team that I work with. So like engineers, developers, etc., project managers, product managers. We untangle like how different personas might think about new features, and then I brought them through like a prioritization tree. Although I also here diagrammed in the back, I had like a brain writing exercise, which is kind of like brainstorming. Like I love doing like brainstorming with developers as well, like not just designers. It really can like open up things. And it's stuff like this that like continues to get people to like want to work with you and like trust you, also like feel more comfortable speaking up. And what I love about doing like prioritization efforts is it really helps you as a designer like know, okay, how do I prioritize my own work? Uh, Personally, as the lead product designer or one of the leads, like I'm working on a lot of different products right now, so I have to really understand what I need to work on day to day and really plan out my work. So if we're not like prioritizing, like it's really difficult for me to do that. So I also love mapping it out to like totals and numbers because it helps like bring a little more like of a data point of view to like what might be or what we think is important in it. And then if something in the future, like for instance, hey, we ranked this feature really high, it scored really high amongst like desirability, feasibility, or visibility, or viability even. Maybe it scores really high, or we score it high, and then later it just doesn't do as well. And we can go back and kind of like check what we were thinking and like adjust moving forward. But out of like that prioritization effort, like came clarity for like in this case, when I was doing one of these workshops, not just for the next release, but it helped like plan multiple quarters of roadmap session like features and uh collaboration like this, like it doesn't just solve today's problem. Like this helps build alignment. Trust over time. So it I mean, whenever I join a new team, I'm like, I just want to, I wish these folks trusted me. I don't know these folks, but like stuff doesn't happen instantly. You know, when you become friends with folks, like it's not instant. You have to like spend time with each other. Um, it doesn't come overnight. And I remember on that product I was talking about earlier, like we worked on it for a while, and early on, sometimes we'd bring things to the executive team or other stakeholders, and we would get a lot of pushback or and we would revise. Eventually, though, over time, I remember bringing artifacts back or new ways like that we are thinking of building it and eventually getting more, hey, you're the experts, we trust you. But that like didn't happen overnight. Like it took a long time. And that same trust kind of works both ways. So, especially when you're thinking about like teammates that you work with and communication. So, like my product manager I worked with, like I feel like we developed a rapport where like we can tell each other that we disagree with them. Like we can just outright say like I don't agree or I think we should move in a different way or like I don't understand this. Like and we can say that to each other and we're not like we don't take it personally. Like I know my teammates won't judge me for disagreeing. They're not going to see me as just being like a stick in the mud. And they know I'll respect their perspective too. Like, I think I've used the phrase, like, I'm not going to die on a hill, like, for a bunch of things. I think as designers, we have to, like, have those priorities. Like, there's certain things I feel like as a lead where I'm like, okay, this is incredibly important to me. And I'm going to, like, here's research, here's a bunch of stuff. There's other things where I'm like, I don't necessarily know. I have a bit of a gut feeling, but I can be convinced. Like I feel like we never shouldn't be able to be convinced, especially as designers with our coworkers. Like I think that we start losing something. So empathy and trust, it creates better design. It's not just about users, it's about your coworkers, your stakeholders, your whole team, especially when you join new teams. And when people feel safe and when they trust you and when they know their own voice matters, like you can build not just better products, but better teams. And again, like that's all I want. I want to work on like awesome teams, building awesome products. Otherwise, I wouldn't stay at a company. Like I would move on. It's one of those things like I need. So by this point, some key takeaways, you can probably tell design influence, it like I don't think it just comes from Figma or like having a fancy Figma file. Like I think that's awesome. It's a lot of fun. We've run hackathons and I love just like diving into Figma for half a day and it feels like a day off. Uh, but I really think it comes from trust, building empathy, and showing up for your team over and over again. And this is something I've learned through trial and error. It's not just something I learned from being a product designer. And it's really what I want to leave you with today. So there's like, I could probably say more than five, but I think like these core things, like leading through action, that influence comes from empathy, clarity, and follow through. This is not some formal position. I was not a lead product designer when I was designing that earlier product I was talking about. Like, I think I was in a mid-level. uh, and your actions are going to earn trust faster than like a title ever could. Clarifying problems, like spend time understanding context, not just for the problems that you're trying to solve as far as the product, but for the problems your coworkers are dealing with. Like it's going to save you time later. It's going to help you build a better relationship with people. And then ensure that you are actually solving those problems that you're like it'll expand the room for you to work on the work. Listening first. Like take your time to understand your team and stakeholders. Like really get to know these folks. Um, make it intentional. They'll notice if you call them out on something, like call them out meaning like in a good way, like, hey, uh, one of your coworkers did something great, like shout them out. Or if you see them present something, like send them a ping, like ask questions about it. Like that'll help you like build relationship with your team. It'll help build respect. And it'll help ensure your work actually helps people succeed. And then building trust deliberately, like psychological safety and consistency are everything. And when people feel safe sharing their concerns or pushing back against you as a designer, you're going to get better solutions. You're going to have a stronger team. And it takes a team to build the whole product. Maybe in the future we'll be able to vibe code the entire thing and ship it, but by ourselves. But who knows? I don't think we're there quite yet for enterprise at least. Um, collaborating visibly and iteratively. So workshopping, prioritization charts, like all those empathy maps, brainwriting, like those are all tools. But like I think like most of all is just like actually working together on things, like building things together. Sometimes that means getting people into FigJam or using a tool that they're more comfortable with. Maybe they're more comfortable with in Excel. So move to Excel. Um, like collaboration is not just about like solving today's problem. It's going to help you set yourself and the team up for success in the future. So like if you take nothing else away, like so combining empathy and communication, like it can help you lead and create meaningful impact, even in these like very ambiguous or complex environments, which software frequently is. And that's about it. So these are my social things. So I think y'all mentioned like being very open to talk and stuff like that. So if you want to reach out, as long as I'm not trying to put a baby to bed, I'm pretty available.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks so much. I have to say, I know all the senior product designers in the room are probably like, all of this makes sense to me, and I use it every day in my work. But I know you arrived at it by just really introspecting and learning and probably making a lot of mistakes on how to do things better. So really appreciate you like synthesizing your own learnings into these kind of easy to consume statements, and I really appreciate that. I have a bunch of questions, but yeah, Anardo, you get the first one.
Yes. Stefan, amazing presentation. I love the walkthrough, authenticity, especially when you mentioned we worked in restaurants. That's something I did too. I used to work for Emerald's, and that experience was really rough, right? I remember with the chef was totally not friendly to me, and I had to wait 2 hours after my double ended before I could walk to my car. So really appreciate that. And one of the things I wanted to bring up that you go through this journey, right? And it's a bit of a happy path, right? Because you have to go through the slides. But in our industry, you mentioned that you're doing this amazing research, that you are establishing this like physical safety, right? Which is something I do in a very different way. I never saw it the way you did it. I think I appreciate that. That's a great example. But I want you to tell me, like, how did you gain this many skills, right? Going into a profession. And a lot of the times we find ourselves in roles that maybe they're a contract role or they're in a startup and you have to deliver things very quickly, right? And you don't always get a chance to learn the skills. How did you do that? How did you have that, like, if you will, like that patience and that calm to go through this process and learn this process and then establish? I want to hear that from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic question. I'm gonna try not to answer it sarcastically with family trauma. Uh, the patience, I think, was definitely a learned skill. Through working at many different companies, in many different types of roles. And I think just many different jobs that like were incredibly stressful. Uh, I don't I don't know if there's like a silver bullet for figuring out the patience thing, but I think part of it is like figuring out what helps you get through a day and helps keep you level-headed. And sometimes, I mean, at least for me, that was realizing, okay, I need to bike and run outside of work, or I need to go to therapy. Like, I need to work on myself outside of the job. It's not just about the day that you're there from 9 to 5. It's about making sure like you're a full human through everything. Um, I can definitely empathize with that we're frequently put in positions where we need to do a million things. Um, Not every role is like that. A lot of jobs are becoming more generalized, especially for UX. But there are some roles sometimes that give you a little more breathing room. Um, so I encourage anyone who's really in the thick of it to just like vibe check themselves and their role, like to make sure that there isn't a problem with the actual role. But if there isn't, I think it's the other side, like making sure you're thinking about yourself as a human outside of work.
Thank you.
Hi, I really appreciate your talk, especially the points that you brought up about building trust. That is something I'm quickly learning at my current role. I guess I just had a question, like, it does take time to build trust, especially when you're new on a team. And I guess, did you ever feel like sometimes in those new teams, how did you, besides taking the time to build that trust, sometimes, did you ever feel like sometimes your design decisions weren't maybe as heard because you were early in a team? And kind of how do you deal with building that trust so people can really listen to your points as well as building those relationships? Because I think that's like a huge part of design currently. And it is
Do you hear that at least?
I don't know if you can hear me still.
Sorry, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry.
All right, I think
We had a
things
great
fixed.
question, so. Okay.
I think I heard most of the question.
Okay, yeah, it was more just like, I guess when you're early in a team and making those design decisions, like even if you feel like
Yeah.
I honestly really love working with my team. Everyone is very respectful. And I guess I just wanted to hear your thoughts on like when you're new to a team and you have a strong, I guess, design opinion, how do you bring that up while also maintaining that trust, even if that means disagreeing with people?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. Um, Putting yourself out there when you're new on a team, I think is very important, and just doing it, like I hate to say it, just like doing it anyway. I think initially it's about setting up those one-on-ones, like making sure you're introducing yourself, not to just the design team, but to everyone in the org. Even if, you know, uh, sometimes with your manager's help, like, hey, what kind of skip levels should I be looking to, etc. With internally, with the design decisions you're making, like I think documenting things like your decision making and your research process and everything will help you feel more confident about what you're doing to then know, like, okay, why you're making these decisions. It'll help show your team what you're doing, and it'll kind of bring them, like I mentioned, like bring your design team along for the ride, which will help bring about that trust. I think even like at my current role at NeoGov, there was definitely a long time where I thought like, am I talking too much? Am I, XYZ, like all those little emotions. I think they're very natural. But I think as long as you're like kind of making yourself visible, I think that's incredibly important as a designer. And it's not something I would ever dissuade anyone from. I think it's incredibly normal to do and needed on a design team. I hope that helped a bit.
Thumbs up.
Wicked.
Hello, Stephen. I have a question for you. Like you, I'm in an enterprise solution space in government. And one of the things I'm curious to hear about, you said earlier that prioritization is really important for you because you're working on multiple products. In terms of building trust, as you're working on multiple products, presumably multiple stakeholder groups, how do you navigate building trust knowing that you have to prioritize between different teams or different stakeholders and products? And could you share a little bit about your experience of that, like higher level, if you will, working across teams with trust building?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. When I would with the project I was talking about earlier, I was lucky that that was like became one of my core focuses. So I didn't really have to balance as much. There was a little bit, but I remember moving onto that project and telling another PM like, "Hey, I'm not really going to be able to do, you can assign me some things, but like we can meet once a week. We can meet every other week. I'll give you an hour of my time, like literal on camera. We can design in FigJam or something. That's all I have." And kind of explaining why, like what's going on. And I've never, at least in that instance, I didn't get like much pushback. Still honestly, he's now like a PM for the team that I moved on to. So it kind of like cycled back. Um, although now that I'm taking on other responsibilities, so I've even more recently had to tell that team that I was working on that project, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to help you guys as much. I'm not going to be able to run those prioritization sessions. I'm not going to be able to like help you workshop everything. You're gonna have to, I'm gonna have to like let you free a little bit. You have the tools, do them, and then I can maybe join you for some of it. Um, and I think part of it, hopefully you have a little bit of time to communicate that. Like in my case, I had built up that strong relationship with that team, so it wasn't me telling people I didn't know, "Hey, I don't have time for you." It was me saying the people I care about that I share photos of my son with. Like it's not, here's a cute photo of him in a Halloween costume. It's not people I don't know. Like these are folks that I've worked together with like closely. I mean, we're past a lot of the days of like going out to get beers with our coworkers most of the time, but that doesn't mean you can't build those strong working relationships. And I think that is one part that helps. But there's also situations where you have to like thread that thin line. And sometimes that means, when people send meeting invites, you have to be like, hey, I need an agenda, like, or I can't go. Hey, I really, here's this documentation. I've mapped out what I think's a prioritization. Like, what do you think? If that doesn't work, hey, here's 30 minutes. Let's go and do an enough test or like decide the usefulness of everything and really quickly prioritize things so that that you can move on with what you need to do. Above all, it's like hopefully having a manager that you can communicate this to like really manage up and out. Generally though, once you're a lead, like you can like start communicating, hey, I'm working on X, Y, and Z. It's important to all of these stakeholders that these folks should know. Like this shouldn't be some weird unknown thing. It might make people upset, but in those cases, I'm generally like, hey, I mean, this one of my PMs like essentially a close friend. I'm like, hey, let so and so know, like if you want more of my time, like I want to give you more of my time, but we all need to fight for it collectively. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the strategy you've been talking about, which has been really helpful, is a lot about the trust on the internal side of the team. But so from the product manager side, can you speak a little bit to your experiences or sort of examples of where you've had to work trust with a client to build on the leveraging sort of the value of usability, the value of solid design, and sort of build that trust with the customer, and that customer has many varieties, right? But like that sort of outside the team sort of view.
Yeah, that's a great question. Prior to working specifically in product, that first ed tech company, we did like creative services. So it eventually got to the point where my manager stopped going on customer calls and started putting me on customer calls. Uh, and I was on dozens a day, and it got worse once the pandemic happened. But a lot of like explaining the value in like simplified terms, like not using jargon, for instance. Like most stakeholders, even if you're also thinking of outside our team, like executives, like aren't thinking of like, user journeys or necessarily even always personas. They want to be able to map things to a business like outcome. I read an interesting article recently about just like mapping mapping what the business journey is compared to the user journey and being able to kind of like link those two things together, I think can help. But I think really it came down to approaching them where they are, which, goes back to what I was saying about even your close coworkers on your embedded teams. Like, what is that executive thinking about? Like, what are they considering? Not to say that I'm not necessarily nervous in a room full of executives. Like, I frequently have been nervous in those situations, but and on calls with clients, like I haven't done just a ton of UX with mostly I've just worked in enterprise software. So I've mostly been on those like small internal teams working through things. But I think even internally it turns into like just making sure you kind of drop the jargon of what our industry frequently goes into, like discussing craft and like delight, things like that. Like an executive generally doesn't want to hear that. I hope that helps. Might have froze.
Hey, Steven, thank you for you being here. I really love kind of the practical, like, here's how we tactically made this happen. And one of the things I noticed on your design spec template or design documentation template was KPIs. And something I have on mine as well, I call it like, how do we measure success, right? Like, how do we know we did the thing and it actually achieved the outcome we're after? I'd love to hear, maybe for the example that you kind of talked about today, what did that look like as far as kind of measuring, like, yeah, we shipped the product, but then afterwards, like, how did we measure that we did the thing, we achieved the outcome we were after?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when it comes to managing officer stress or, you know, any emergency personnel stress, like we're looking for the stories from customers, you know, whether it's a success story or whether something happened that our system could deal with more properly. So we're getting data in to track that. So I think that is one way. I think measuring success, especially on fast-moving teams, is always difficult. And getting your team to care about like setting success metrics is incredibly difficult. But it's important. It's something that I want to improve on myself. It's why it's in my documentation, our design team's documentation, even. There's also like, depending on what you're working on, you know, AI features or whatever, you can embed ways to track success that way as well. It really, I mean, it really depends on what you're working on pretty often. But I think as a designer, it's also important to like, okay, like figuring out what matters for you as well. Also what matters to the business. Like I think they could be slightly different.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have a couple, but I'm gonna tie them together kind of. Early in your conversation, and Stephen, thank you. This is awesome. It's great to hear other companies and people talk about the same kind of challenges and approaches. So thank you. It's very cool. First one you talked about enterprise UX and what it's like to be a part of an enterprise group. And you come in, you don't get to start fresh. I've worked with people that they're like, so when do I get to build the new thing? And it's like, well, never. Like, but so it'd be cool to hear your like impression of how that has like evolved your perspective working in enterprise. And then the other question I have is like stakeholder relationships. Stakeholders, we have regular recurring meetings, you're introducing stuff, and then they go, oh, this thing seems really, really bad. We should fix that too. And the two doesn't mean stop working on all of the other things you've committed to, but the two means that's the most important thing you should work on today. How have you addressed those things?
Yeah, great questions. So building new and just never building new. Yeah, that's a big enterprise thing. Because frequently you join a team like in the past and you onboard onto what you're building, like the product, and you're like, oh my God, it's so bad. And you 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 hear other people, honestly, what I would tell a lot of people is like, don't lose that. Like, know that this thing is bad. Like, know that there's problems with the product. Because it's very easy to like fall into the trap of uh of getting used to a product, no matter its faults. Um, I've definitely, now that I've been onboarded onto over a dozen different products that have all been in flight already, some for 20 plus years, have gotten very used to just, okay, this is a thing that exists. It's what I'm working on now. But I personally find it really, I think you have to like find what is that challenge that interests you. If it's working on new things, you should probably go work at startups that are starting to build new things. If that's really what you want as a designer. If if you're really interested in like digging deep into like kind of broken things and fixing them, like I think enterprise software is like a great place to be because generally you're gonna be getting onto teams that have really broken products that a lot of customers are struggling to use, maybe not actually the people that pay for them. But so there's a lot of opportunity for designers to like improve things. And the second question, a stakeholder giving you like, oh, realizing that something else is bad, we should fix this, but doesn't necessarily mean stop. Yeah, that's a tough one. Right now, at least on our team, we run everything in design sprints. So it like helps us track all the work we're doing. So if there's something I need to drop, like or if there's, I point everything I'm working on, just like a developer. So I know kind of like what is my workload. And that's kind of an amorphous thing that's I've been learning over the last like year. But if sometimes it really depends on who the stakeholder is. If it's a certain stakeholder, I'm probably going to drop something. Or communicate with my team, because generally it means communicating with the team and figuring out a way so that the work keeps going. Generally at the end of the day, it means something has to drop. Like personally, I have to log out at 5. My baby needs to eat and take a bath because my wife works nights as a nurse. So generally you end up needing to do that like stakeholder management another way, where you have to talk to another PM or someone that's like, hey, I need a little more time on X, Y, or Z. Most of the time, design is not an emergency. I think a lot of people act like it is. What my wife deals with as a nurse at at a hospital, those are emergencies. But what we deal with most of the time are not emergencies. So I really think it's like hopefully building those safe relationships with other stakeholders where you can push back a little bit on timelines, like, hey, I need an extra day or two or something like that. Sometimes it depends. Maybe it's the CEO asking for this, and yeah, you might need to do something different.
I happen to still have the mic, so I can say thank you.
You're welcome.
That was amazing. Thanks.